My name is Katrina Mitchell. I'm the Chief Community Impact Officer here at United Way. I thank you so much for joining this conversation around telling our community stories. We're so excited to have you this morning. Our team has been talking a lot about storytelling, and today we're going to look at the challenges and opportunities of solutions journalism and how Georgia nonprofits are evolving their own storytelling and grant-making practices. And we will be sharing some of the lessons learned. I'm looking forward to today's panel, and I want to acknowledge two of my panelists who I had a chance to prep with. Max Blau, the investigative journalist at ProPublica and co-founder of Canopy Atlanta. We've had the pleasure of getting to work with each other, so happy to be here. And then Michelle Faust Raghavan, she's the instructor at the Solutions Journalism Network and the founder of Claridad Media. Thank you for joining us today. I'd also like to thank Jennifer Camacho, a former local news journalist and a founder of Plot My Story, and our co-host, the Atlanta Press Club, and especially our co-sponsor, Georgia Humanities, which is working to improve media literacy across the state. And I think she shared some books that are here. There you go.
Take a book on your way out.
Take a book on your way out. Before we get started, as the co-host nonprofit for today's discussion, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on United Way and some updates. So our United Way over the past few months has been sharing insights from our analysis over the past 5 years of data across child well-being in the 13-county metro region. Our Child Well-Being Index was designed to offer a comprehensive assessment of children's environment from birth to adulthood across Greater Atlanta's 13-county metro region. This data really is to help us have a holistic perspective about the state of children's well-being that includes their health, all the things that come into and encompass a child's physical, emotional, social, and cognitive development. The data for us has shown that there is 77,000 children who still do not have what they need to be thriving in our region. And that means that there's 79 neighborhoods that are facing a child well-being crisis. And for us, that is really important and guides our work. There is some good news, though, that as you all have seen, a lot of the temporary resources that have gone into communities around rental evictions, rental assistance, food assistance, those resources have made a difference. But we still seem to see a number of neighborhoods who are in significant crisis. And many of those communities are disproportionately communities of color, where their access to technology, workforce, food, healthcare are severely lagging. These are the kind of data stories we want to be able to tell. We're committed to sharing and investigating what's happening in the community. We've really thought about how do we make sense of that data and allow others to be able to use that data in their storytelling. For us, we believe that every child deserves to have a quality education, live in a safe neighborhood, and have the opportunity to fulfill their promise. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Jeremy Martinez, who's our Director of Monitoring and Evaluation, and he's going to share a little bit about how we've gathered the data, but how we've made sense of it. Before he jumps into those findings, I also want to just offer you to be able to access that data. The data is a resource for any future storytelling. All the data combined is right on our website and available for use for you. And depending on your story, you may also want to connect to our team. We have a number of subject matter experts who are knowledgeable in all areas from early childhood to housing. They're social workers, and they really do understand what's happening in communities. So thank you so much this morning. I'm interested in this conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy.
Thank you, Katrina. So I am Jeremy Martinez. I'm the Director of Monitoring and Evaluation here at United Way. One of my roles is to take data to understanding, and then take that understanding to understanding how we can invest in communities so that people's lives, families' lives, communities become better off. I'm going to be looking at my paperwork every once in a while, just make sure I hit some high points. As my colleagues know, when I start to talk, I start to roll. So I want to make sure I hit the high points. I also got a timer on my watch to make sure I don't go over. So United Way of Greater Atlanta has been and continues to be a data-driven and data-informed investor organization. Why is that important? Data is becoming more complex and expanding every day. We have phones, we have laptops, we have tablets. They're tracking data on us. We're tracking who's hitting our websites. It's just becoming massively complex. And so United Way came together with partners and became a thought leader around what types of data do we need to know that are relevant and that really show what's happening in our communities' lives, right? So with the resources that we have, with our partners, our staff, our knowledge, and our resources, we put together the Child Wellbeing Index, as Katrina briefly described. We're not going to go into the details of that index very specifically today. They are on the website. We could answer any questions about that, dive into that at a later date. Taking that, that data, we were able to put together the index. Not only did we put together the index and use it for our own strategies and investments, a lot of our partners do as well. Actually, a lot. Current to date, we have over 200 partners, 200 organizations that are using the Child Wellbeing Index to inform their strategies. These are not only our grantees. These are also government branches, departments, nonprofits such as Junior Achievement and the Georgia After School Network, and even Georgia Department of Family and Children Services use it to help understand where to intervene, where to place services, and place resources. So with our staff knowledge, our staff resources, we take this large amount of data and we put together the Child Wellbeing Index. This is the Child Wellbeing Index map. We have a spectrum. That darkest blue are those communities that have the highest needs. That darkest gold are those communities that have the most resources, the least need. And when we look at it here, we see that it's pretty, distributed. We could see large trends. We see large themes. We see where it's pocketed. But it doesn't tell us too much from a family and a personal perspective. So with our expertise, with the resources we have, we like to hone in on it. One of the things that we see are incidences like this, where we have a dark blue community that's right across the street from communities of least need. And without us being able to hone in at the neighborhood level, we wouldn't be able to see this. What we know these are neighborhoods. You cross the street and your life outcomes improve dramatically. It's not only in Cobb, we see it in Gwinnett. We see this pocket of blue surrounded by this pocket of gold. We need to know what's happening there. We also see it in DeKalb. We see this peninsula of highest need communities surrounded, maybe embargoed by all these lowest need communities. What we see possibly is when you cross sidewalks and you cross asphalt, life outcomes improve dramatically. This is the Beaufort the Beaufort Highway corridor right there, right in DeKalb County. Right, it's where we go. I used to work at a company and we did what we called gastro-tourism. Go to all those really good restaurants right there, but the folks who are living around that, this is what they're seeing. Again, with our expertise and our analysis, we're able to find these things. So big picture, right? That's the complex theme, we're seeing that. But what does this mean for the people who live there? When we're able to dive into those measures of our Child Wellbeing Index, two of those measures are employment and something called emerging adults, and I'll describe it here in a second. When we look at employment, the people who are working in the blue and in the gold, they are so similar. There is a 1 percentage point difference in employment rates between those two areas. They are identical. When we look at the youth who are enrolled in school, enlisted in the military, or employed, what we call emerging adults, again, very, very similar. What we see is the people are working in these communities at similar rates, and they are engaged in their education or their future careers at similar rates. The people are similar. Where they are dissimilar, though, is incomes. The same folks who are working at similar rates have disproportionately different incomes, salaries and poverty rates. By literally crossing two sidewalks and asphalt, we see the difference. And the housing cost burden. If you live on one side, your housing, the amount of money you spend on your housing is more affordable than not. So what this shows us is, it's the circumstances, not the people. So making sense of this, right? Those are the facts. My colleagues know I say very few things a lot. Our jobs are to take facts and make truth out of it. Those are not the same things, right? Facts, we have, if you're an anthropologist, you find the pottery, and then you start to figure out what does it mean for the lives. Those are the facts. But we do a thing that we call formally sense making, capital S, capital M. Taking numbers, taking maps, taking charts, doing the analysis. We go out and reach out to communities that are living this experience with grantees that we work with other entities in those communities to make sense of it. It's a very deliberative process. It takes time. But what it shows us is the folks who are living it inform it, and also helps us uncover a lot of those historical inequities that are causing it, so that we could find solutions that are the most relevant. On your handout, I'm not going to talk too much about that, but on your handout, you'll see the 3 colored bubbles there. Those describe our investment strategies in large buckets. Again, you could find more information on that on our website, and I encourage you to do that. But as we start to make sense of why this is happening, we funnel it through our investment strategies, and those are those 4 bubbles. So often as funders, we want to move the facts and the truths into relevant and impactful outcomes and impacts. Oftentimes as funders, we'll come in and say, hey, we have spoons. We're going to help feed the folks who need to be fed. We have spoons. And the community says, great, we need forks. But we say, we have the resources of the spoons. They're similar. They'll both address hunger. Here you go with your spoons. And then eventually what happens is communities say, we don't really need it, but we're going to use it. They start chipping away at it. And then we ended up with sporks. And then they don't have what they need. We don't have what we need. And so the issues are never really being addressed. So moving from that sense making, the what and the hows, or the whys and the hows to the what. Again, with sense making, we partner with our grantees and other nonprofits and other entities to say what are those solutions that need to be implemented. And what we end up with through these investment strategy are high quality direct services, right? That's the traditional funding that folks see, right? We give money to food banks, we give money to help offset housing costs, maybe a voucher, but we also do things like capacity building, helping organizations be better at their jobs so that they could do better and inform more and improve more lives. And we also do systems approach. That's the most complex work that we do. But as we're moving more and more towards that, right, if you want to change something, you set a goal. If you want to change something once, you set a goal. If you want to make lasting change, you change the systems. So why are these things happening? That's get up the river, that's change what's happening so that we don't have to do so many direct services. Folks are improving and in control of their own lives more. So working with those organizations, working with partners, working with other funders that may be funding in different investment strategies, bringing those folks together to do a holistic change model. When the community informs what's happening, it also informs what we're measuring. They say, these are the outcomes this community needs. That leads us to accomplishing more impactful and rich outcomes. I'm not going to read these. I'll just describe them very briefly. These are just 3 of 100 that we could have pulled from, but we have a nice marketing piece that I pulled this from. Families are being housed. Youth are moving into apprenticeship programs where they're experiencing career opportunities and getting jobs. And children and caregivers are learning how and experiencing science-based child rearing experiences. So you heard my beep. I didn't intend to take the whole 10 minutes, but that was the last slide, other than the question slide. So I flew through it. It was a lot of information. Happy to answer questions now and later, but I'll leave a couple minutes open to questions. I was so clear. No, I know it's a lot, and I know we have other folks, but like I said, I'm easy to reach, work through whoever you're communicating with at United Way Greater Atlanta now, and they'll get us connected. So what I want to do is hand it off to Jennifer to our moderator to move us into the panelist section, and thank you very much.
I'd love, while we're kind of getting settled, to go around. You heard a little bit from Katrina already, but just a quick overview of who you are, what your role is in your current capacity.
Sure. So again, Katrina Mitchell, Chief Community Impact Officer. My values, and I'm guided by the fact that my family were always givers, and so that's how I came to this nonprofit and philanthropy space. I also have twins, 14-year-old twins, and that's really why I do this work. Born and raised in New York, but Atlanta's my home, and so my hope is to be able to support this community in what I do. So I oversee our community engagement team as well as our 211 call center.
I'm Max Blau, and I'm here as I've been a journalist for about 12 or 13 years at a variety of different outlets. And can you all hear me, by the way?
If you press the button on the side of the mic, that'll turn it on.
Oh, are none of us on? That would be ironic. Yeah,
that?
we're not.
Is that
No.
better? Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. And my day job is I'm working as an investigative journalist with ProPublica, which is a nonprofit newsroom that focuses on accountability journalism. And I also am a co-founder and current board member with Canopy Atlanta, which is an organization that helps train communities to tell stories about themselves and in places that have been overlooked or disregarded by legacy media outlets.
My name is Michelle Faust Raghavan. Hi. I've been a journalist for many, many years. I spent 10 years in public media covering policy of many sorts, mostly health policy. And everywhere I go, when you're talking about these policies and you talk about these problems, who's doing this better? Like, who's trying to fix this? And I came across this concept of solutions journalism and tried to implement it, failed, did better, had in-between stories, and I went to work for Solutions Journalism Network handful of years ago. And now I run a program called Claridad Media, where I work with newsrooms to improve their outreach to communities, as well as the functioning of what's going on inside and the systems inside of newsrooms.
Love it. We, in all of the materials leading up to this event, talked a lot about solutions journalism. So if you don't mind, Michelle, we'll go ahead and have you run through a few slides. Let's go ahead and set the stage. What is solutions journalism? What is it not?
Okay, so solutions journalism, according to the Solutions Journalism Network, which they did not invent it, but came up with the codifying of exactly what it is for teaching. It is rigorous, evidence-based reporting on responses to social problems. So whatever the problem out there, somebody is working to try to make it better, and it is our job to see how well that is working. If there's ways to see if that's working well, sometimes we try to solve problems and make bigger problems, and all of those things are stories, not just the problem that we're facing. And every solution story has these 4 pillars. So if you walk away from this conversation thinking of anything else, remember that we're looking at the response. How is somebody trying to make it better, and really how it works? Obviously, solution stories have characters. Characters are extremely important, but we also need to know how they are doing the thing. We need evidence to make sure that it's actually working. Insights are kind of giving us a sense of like, what are the lessons that can be learned around this? Sometimes those lessons are, key factors that are needed or ways that things have gone wrong in the past. And then, of course, limitations, because we are journalists and we're not doing public relations. We're going to be looking at this holistically of what's going right and what's not going quite as right as we're hoping. There's lots of reasons why we do these. You can see these slides later, but I think some of those are pretty self-evident. And basically, if it is working, right, if we've got evidence, then it's absolutely newsworthy and relevant and important. And the limitations really come back to, we're not promoting necessarily one way to do things, but getting into what is happening. Generally, we're not talking about something that's untested, right? If you want to do speculative journalism, that's different. If like somebody's trying something, but we have no sense of whether it's working or not, that's not what we're talking about, solutions journalism. And what most journalists come to me and they say, well, I've been doing solutions journalism for a long time, talk about a problem, and then they throw up, here's some things that might work. That's not what we're talking about with solutions journalism. That's not a bad idea, but those are the stories we do. We hope we follow up with some solutions journalism. It's not hero worship, and it's not the, hey, we bought him a car. Isn't that nice? Right? That's not solving a systemic problem of lack of transportation in a community. Lots of great stuff here, but basically what I want you to walk away is when you go out and cover that problem, whatever that problem is, ask always who's doing it better. If we could do it better in Atlanta, what would it look like? Who would we like to model it after? And if you're talking to people who know the problems well, they'll have somebody out there who's doing it better, whether it's an education problem, a medical problem, something else.
So, Max, Canopy Atlanta and investigative reporting, sometimes people go, well, those seem like, very interesting journalistic endeavors, but maybe not the same exact thing. I'd love to know how your work through Canopy has helped inform the investigative work that you do.
I think one of the things with Canopy that, when a group of more than a dozen journalists came together to create Canopy and figure out what is actually needed with this organization, I think one of the things we honed in on was who are we writing for, and is the story that we are trying to tell actually impactful for the people who need that story. I think all of us at some point of our career have probably experienced being assigned to write about a community that has a problem, whether, to pick a few that were on the Child Wellbeing Index, could be English Avenue or Pittsburgh. Pick your community in Atlanta, and you may have been told to go there to write about for me it was the APS cheating scandal, or drug issues on the West Side. And I think with Canopy, as we started going to communities and asking on the front end, maybe dozens or 100 people, what are the most important journalistic needs that you have in your community? What I may have had as my top three would deviate from what the community actually wanted. And so I think a lot of this has informed my work at ProPublica in terms of when I set out to investigate something, I'm thinking with my own work of, does the story that I do a lot more like project design and a lot more talking to people that are impacted by the specific issue, even beyond, say, the person that may have tipped me off to a problem, because I want to understand how the thing that I may be spending a week, a month, a year on could potentially, is this really going to matter when the story comes out to the community that I'm writing about?
And we're gonna jump later into, okay, if you don't have a year, you don't have a month, how can we still apply this on a day of turn, right? I mean, it sounds so great, but you all are gonna get to nuts and bolts, which I think is gonna be exciting. I first want to touch on this idea of what is an expert, because I think nonprofits have shifted the way, especially, folks who are kind of leading that, like United Way, and how you view experts in the community who are change makers. And I'd like to start there, and then we'll get into journalism, what it means to be an expert and to look for those.
Sure. For us, as we looked at the Child Wellbeing Index, it kind of guided our understanding about what's happening in communities. And you hear Jeremy talk about the sense making we made, right? So we do have this relationship with nonprofit partners and government leaders and others, but they give you some information, and then you really want to understand what's actually really happening in communities. And so for us, it is both folks with lived experience as well as learned experience. And they both have something to offer. But one of the things that we thought was very important was the lived experience. Like, what is actually happening? Yes, nonprofit leaders are really important to being able to guide the strategies and the solutions. But are we actually talking to the young person who is looking for that job, right? To really understand what is happening. Are we actually talking to the family who's being impacted by any set of these issues in communities? And so we have really turned our attention to making sure that we're not just getting that data from our nonprofit leaders that comes sometimes in quantitative data, but we also are getting the qualitative data, right? Getting a sense of what's actually happening to those with lived experience. And I guess a very real, tangible example is when we kind of thought about what is happening with those number of young people who are not in school and not working. There's all kinds of things that could be happening. During COVID, lots of teenagers opted out of virtually being in school. When we actually talked to young people, they were saying, well, those jobs are interesting, right? Logistics and all those things. I'm not interested in that. I want to be focused on the media industry. I want to be involved in TV, right? And so how do you actually listen to what they're saying and also design programming and inform the strategies and solutions? And I think we are trying more and more to make sure, and I think our work with Canopy was also to also hear from residents, to hear from residents who are experiencing some of these complex challenges and understand what they need, and really be able to design strategies and inform our partners around how to design solutions for those folks with lived experience.
What is an expert, Max?
I think early in my career, just to use a United Way example, from when I was reporting on people experiencing homelessness, this was around almost a decade ago, but around the Peachtree and Pine shelter shutting down. An expert to me back then would have been talking to someone like ProTip. I think over time, the more and more, like on a deadline, I would go to the person who was either a thought leader or a professional expert, whereas today, I think the more important expertise is like going inside of Gateway and actually spending some time. Gateway, if you haven't been there, is like in South Downtown is a hub of many different service providers, and you can actually meet people living through the experience of homelessness. And I think or trying to transition out of homelessness, but I think by talking to people actually going through the issues, they can tell you a lot more about what is actually like, and in a way that's not just about getting like an anecdote, but can inform the way you think and frame a story potentially.
Michelle?
I mean, I agree with Katrina in that people are experts in their own lived experience, whatever that is, right? So we need to be finding people who can really talk about what it is to live in their shoes, even if we're also including folks who are doing that academic research about the thing. But the best researchers that I know who are doing it at the academic level either have lived the thing and or are continuing to speak with people and make sure that they've got their feet on the ground. So always coming back to that. The other thing I would say is that depending on the length of your story, how much time, having the data that you can get from those, big name experts is great, but they don't necessarily need to, if your story is only 800 words, maybe you don't have time to have everyone in there. Include the data, maybe give a nod to them, but the person who should be the center of the story is the person who's living the thing.
I love that you said when we were talking about, one, if you're on deadline, this idea of, at a minimum, start with cultural humility. So we can talk about doing some of this on deadline. Talk to me about what that is and any other thoughts you have on how to make this work when the time is tight.
Yes, well, we can talk about a lot of those things, but I just want to talk about cultural humility. The term cultural humility, I had heard, everyone hears cultural competence, right? But how does one become competent in a culture that they do not belong to? And it really comes from humility. It comes from a solution story, on the handout that I gave you all, the QR code, a story where it's about an African-American physician working in a Native American community and helping folks use their own cultural traditions to become clean from whatever addiction that they're struggling with. And she said that was one of the pieces that she said that I thought was so impactful. I have to approach this with cultural humility, and I think not only is it a lesson in terms of solutions journalism, but it is a lesson for journalists as well. We're not always going to be working in our own communities. I've worked in many communities that the people had the same identity and background as me, but their life was very different than mine. And so I needed to take that humility to be able to do my stories better. But on Deadline, I think solutions journalism can be tricky when you get started. And when I had talked to some very young journalists who said, well, what are the ways that I might fail? And I said, let's reframe that. Do you like every single story that you've published that has your byline? Do you think everything is a Pulitzer Prize winner? It's not, right? Let's get this practice and continue to practice the work of solutions journalism. There are people who can support. I can support. There's folks at Solutions Journalism. There's all kinds of resources. That's why I provide the QR code, but it's practice. It's easier if you've got a beat and you know the thing really well. But solutions journalism usually isn't like, if there's a big thing that happens, it's not necessarily that day of story. Day of story is, this happened here, was the initial impact, this is how many people killed, hopefully. That's not the situation, but these big things that happen. But the next day, if there was a huge traffic accident in an intersection, can we look at ways that we fixed intersections elsewhere so that there were fewer accidents with fewer fatalities? Those are things that can be really useful and are helpful, and folks are going to spend more time learning that thing because they know that that's a problem in that particular intersection.
No, I love that. The idea that it might be the follow story. This idea that solutions journalism is always the answer may not be practical in most newsrooms, but when can it be employed? So Max, for you now, when you're on Deadline, you've got a little bit of a longer runway usually when you're writing now, but what are some things that help you when you are hitting a deadline that make that easier, right? What are maybe some seeds you plant along the way to have the sources you need to reach out to?
I think when you're starting to think with more of a solutions journalism-based mindset, it is the way you start. Like if you have 2 days to report a story, your first 4 calls are going to be different than if you were kind of trying to write only about the problem and to just like understand the scope of the problem. That's not to say those things aren't important, but I think to take an example of, say, like a hurricane hits a community and you have to go to South Georgia to report on it. I think your first few calls might be not just to Georgia Power or to see how many people's power was out or to assess the scope of the damage. I think oftentimes it's trying to get as close to people who are impacting, who are on the ground and who are involved in the effort to try to fix something or make something work. I find those subjects more interesting too, generally speaking, because they're often in motion and they are doing something. And so even if you have 1 or 2 days, finding a subject who is in movement doing something can be more compelling than just being at a press conference and hearing the mayor talk and you are the 7th person to repeat that same information as the lead of your story.
I love that you said when we were talking leading up to this panel, you said if you don't have the experts to go to or you don't have that person you can just call up when you're on the line, you might be going to the wrong meetings. Right? What do you mean by that?
I think sometimes going to, like, if it's not in a crisis, like going to a neighborhood association meeting or going to kind of the places where ordinary people are showing up, to the point we're talking about like lived expertise. I think that is where I kind of want to chat with people who are, again, living through the thing and are experiencing it, as opposed to it being more of something that's being studied. Mm-hmm. And so going to like the neighborhood association meeting in Atlanta, or it could be not even like, I think that the meetings you can go to that are on the ground closer to where people are living and experiencing whatever issue it may be, that's where I think sourcing and cultivating sourcing can happen in a way that allows you to find those people.
I love that. Katrina, I think that, and feel free, because I think you may have something to add there too, but the translation here in nonprofit in terms of expert, historically expert meant you had your 501c3 tax status. If you're in a pinch, you need to fund somebody, you go find somebody that fits that bill, who's a known quantity. What is the harder work that nonprofits like United Way have been doing to identify the experts and when in a pinch, know who they need to go to, who's going to move the needle?
Yeah, no, great. And it connects to it because I'll give you a real live example. So as we looked at the data, we saw and identified that there were a set of communities that were of the highest need when we first did this. And that included South Fulton, South DeKalb, and Clayton. And some of those are the same blue areas you just saw. And in that work, as we focused, we wanted to pay attention to what was happening in Clayton, particularly Forest Park and Riverdale, which are communities right across, but we were seeing such deep blue, right, such high need, and we wanted to understand what was happening. And this idea of lived experiences, if you looked on the surface, you would say, okay, the schools are challenged. We had met with the superintendent, we had met with school administrators, county leaders. There's not very few nonprofit leaders, so we really didn't have a whole lot of nonprofit leaders like we have in the city of Atlanta. And they said, okay, really what's happening is that the school needs help trying to make sure these children are in their classrooms and they're not moving from school to school. So what we were seeing was this high rate of student mobility, and for that is how many times a student is moving from school to school within a school year and throughout their academic career, which of course you can imagine creates academic disruption, right? So that's what we thought we were solving, right? Listening to nonprofit leaders, school district professionals, the superintendent, that's what we thought we were solving. As we started to get deeper and actually listen to families and talk to families about what was actually happening, yes, originally the solution was, okay, let's just make sure they get the academic support. They're in after-school programs, they get mental health support, the families have access to what they need to make sure if they move from school to school, they have the resources. Well, when we dug deeper and actually talked to families, the reason why they were moving was because of the housing cost burden in their community. And literally families were moving from extended stay motels to inadequate housing, and every time the rent went up, they had to move to another location, right? So yes, you could have just focused on academically what those students needed, but we would have missed totally that it actually is a housing challenge in that community. And so for us, it was listening to the lived experiences of parents and families that helped us to direct a whole different solution that then got us to say, we need to work with Georgia Appleseed Project. Georgia Appleseed Project has been an important partner of ours in helping to build a coalition to help divert those folks from being evicted. They have had now amazing outcomes from the fact that they paid attention to the housing. And yes, it started with the academic disruption, but if we had not listened to families, we would have totally missed the root of what was causing that. And so for us, we are continuing to remind ourselves is that the nonprofit leaders, community leaders are an important part of the solution, but you also have to ground that in the wisdom and the reality of families who are living this every day to really get to the root of what's happening. And yes, we might want to still focus on academic supports, but we also want to also solve what families need now. And I think that's the part of the lived experience that takes a lot of work. Because you can start and just say, okay, we got it solved and that's it, and then recognize that you really have not changed anything, right? Like you haven't really changed the conditions. It's the systems change work that Jeremy talked about. We want to change the conditions so that no longer is student mobility the challenge. And so we continue to do that. Our work with Canopy was a great example, is really trying to invest in listening to residents in a different way. Yes, we can have listening sessions, talk to community members, but was there a way where Canopy Atlanta was able to cull and curate these stories from residents that also helped to inform and guide our decisions, our grant making, and also guide us in sharing with other funders how you use that kind of data also to inform your strategy.
And that to me is, for former local news journalists, that's exciting. Like the idea that your story could help inform change through nonprofits watching it, reading it, listening to it, and making funding decisions based on, the solution that you've laid out or the partners that you've talked to or the conversation that you've sparked. I want to talk about data, and I'd be remiss if we didn't, and Chad, let me know as we're getting close to time when we need to cut. But data in and of itself, I think the point that was made earlier by Jeremy was really important, this idea that facts and truth, right, can be two different things. And so I would love, Katrina, if you don't mind jumping back in on how even just the child wellbeing map has evolved, right? It looks different than it looked 5 years ago when it launched. And what have we learned in terms of systems, as you just talked about, versus people problems?
Yeah, no, great question. So one very first thing is when we saw the map, when we started in 2016, the map visually showed red, green, and yellow, right? Where the highest need communities, it was red. So you saw, and you could clearly see that the highest need was red. And then you could see where the lowest need was green. As we went through the process of talking to community, again, this is lived experience and talking to folks who were experiencing it, was important data. It absolutely identified that there are need in communities. But what we found by talking to community leaders, particularly in Clayton and Forest Park, is that it demonized their community and made it seem as though it was bad, that there was all bad in that community, because we have mental models that say red means bad and green means good, right? Now, that was not our intention, and not at all were we trying to demonize communities, but that's how they experienced it, right? You're saying that my community is failing and there's no good things. When you actually talk to folks, yes, there's lots of things they want to be different, but they love their community. They're not trying to move anywhere else. There are assets in that community that they feel are very important. And so you'll see a distinct difference. We now have changed the shading because of that, because it was immediately from the feedback from community to make this even stronger. We still want to demonstrate high need. It's just we don't want to demonize communities. And I think that was an important piece of this that was important to changing the map. The second thing was throughout COVID, we had 14 measures, right? Like all the things that we believe were important data points to help us understand child well-being, right? And that included everything from education measures to health measures to housing measures to financial stability measures. Well, post-COVID, we now recognize that there's some other reasons, there's some other factors to well-being in communities. The access to broadband. We all experienced what it looked like to have to go home in 2020 and not have access to being physically in spaces. Well, there were some communities that didn't even have a way to, even if you gave them the laptop, they didn't have access to broadband. And so they literally, young people were literally not being able to get their schoolwork done, right? And people were, we would hear stories of families sitting in parking lots trying to get access to the Wi-Fi in a Publix parking lot just to be able to do their homework, okay? And so access to broadband, we now have that as a measure on the map, right? Because that is an important element of well-being. The second one was the number one call from our 211 call center when COVID hit in March 2020 was for food. No one in this world would have ever imagined that we would have such a challenge with families being able to access food, right? You go home, there's no grocery stores, there's no resources for you to get access to food. And so we now have a measure around food deserts, because in our region, we are continuing to see that another important aspect of well-being is access to healthy food. Do you have a grocery store in your community? Do you have access to food that obviously contributes to, are your children healthy enough so they can get the food to be able to go to school and be able to perform at what we are? So that's another addition to our child well-being measure. The third one was that, as we looked at well-being, we were looking at young children. We kind of know what's happening to an adult. And then for all of us who live in communities, I have teenagers, I have young people in my life, thinking about what's happening with young people. Those young people from, 14 to 18, 24, what are they doing? What's happening? Are they connected to work and not? And so now we know a little bit more about the fact that we have a growing population of young people who are not in school and not working for a whole host of reasons, but they're not tapped in, right? They're not tapped into the economy. They're not a part of contributing to the economy. And so part of our challenge has been, what are we doing to solve for that? And so that's another measure that we added to the index. And it was completely because we were listening to community and recognizing that the data is important, but it has to be relevant. It has to be timely. It also has to look at what is actually happening in community and help us to really understand how we address those solutions in meaningful ways.
Max, I think as we've been with United Way trying to share the information of the map with journalists, it seems like, unfortunately, some of those concerns, the crisis headlines, are what grab the most attention for journalists. What do you see in terms of data, right? Because you can pull any of those stats and facts from any data set. What is the opportunity in being able to use data in your storytelling, but maybe also some pitfalls that you see journalists, and even in your own journey as a journalist, falling into?
I think one of the things that Canopy tried to do in terms of when you look at, it could be the child well-being map, or it could be any other kind of map that outlines deficits and assets in the Metro Atlanta area, that while it's not as formally captured, like as an avid reader of local journalism, I could see the same sorts of deficits playing out in the kinds of coverage that, say, Forest Park or Grove Park and Bankhead were having relative to, say, Buckhead or other communities that have their own local media, in addition to the legacy media that exists in the city. And so I think there was a real opportunity once you move past the fact that, oh wow, oftentimes the only time you hear about Forest Park or English Avenue might be like when there is a problem that happens there, whether it's a fire or a police-involved shooting or some other problem. If you actually go to those communities and spend time there where no one else is, you have a huge opportunity not only to listen, but then to find new and different ways to tell stories that no one else is about those places that are actually useful to the people living there.
Michelle, data.
Well, one thing that I love about looking at data, when we're looking at problems, if we're looking at a data set, well, I want to find solutions, so maybe I'm going to find, I covered a lot of health policies, so I'm looking at several hospitals. I might find this hospital that has the lowest C-section rate, and maybe I want to do a story about that. But maybe it's more interesting to find the other hospital. Maybe doesn't have the ideal C-section rate, but if I can look over time and see they cut their C-section rate in half, they cut their hospital-acquired infection rate in half, now I need to go find out how they did it. And what's the impact of that, right? We know that we've got major issues of people getting sick, people dying in childbirth in 2023. Who's doing it better, and what is the model that we can take to make it better? Even if it's not happening everywhere, somebody's doing something to improve it.
You had a bit of a controversial idea around journalism when we talked last. I don't know if you want to share that, but in terms of how can newsrooms evolve to be able to have capacity to do this kind of storytelling more often? I know we've got newsroom leaders in here and day of turn reporters alike, so.
It may not make me super popular, but I think newsrooms need to think about what can they do well, focus on that, and decide what is it that you're not doing, right? When I talk to newsrooms about what their strategy is going forward, whether it's solutions or community outreach or anything in between, right now, people have access to news from many, many different places. What are you going to shine at? And then people will know to look for you for that thing. But that means stepping away from the things that you're not going to do.
I want to give final thoughts here before we have some time for questions, I think, if we're at that point. Is there anything else that you all want to add to this conversation, something we haven't touched on or that we may have missed? This is the famous journalist. Is there anything else you want to add while I think of what have I forgotten, right?
I have an anecdote, because you were talking about people calling in for food, and over the course of the pandemic, there was a story that it really stood out to me because it reminded me, my family got food from food banks. And we would get things, and my grandmother would bring the box home, and my family's Puerto Rican, and some of the things in the box were just things we didn't really understand how to prepare. So we had food, and in terms of data, it would look like we were fed, but this was not food that was relevant. So one of the stories that I really enjoyed, it came out of Los Angeles County, and it was a food bank that was really seeing the need that there needed to be things that were culturally specific. And food banks kind of saying, okay, in our neighborhood, we're going to have more Asian types of dishes. In this other neighborhood, we're going to work with them to have more Latine options. And that's a story you're not going to see in data of the problem or the solution, but it's definitely an interesting story to find.
Yeah, the other thing I will add is that I do think, a real story, an example of kind of using these kind of stories from Canopy helped to also help me advocate for a national funder to continue to provide resources for our community. So Canopy did a story about the over-policing of the Latino community in Clayton County. And it was really powerful in that you hear so much about what's happening in African American communities, but you did not hear as much about what's happening in Latino communities. And so I had a national funder who a few years ago wanted to invest in criminal justice work, but couldn't really figure out who's doing that work here locally and what the issues were. And that story was very timely and relevant for me to be able to advocate to say there is something here that we want you to help invest in and support. And it really was what allowed them to stay. So now 3 years later, we now have a table of funders who are looking at criminal justice issues across the state. I'm not sure that wouldn't have happened if that story really brought to life the reason why a national funder should pay attention to what's happening in Georgia and ways in which they could help. And so, I do think these stories are powerful, and it came from residents, right? It would have taken that funder too much time to get to schedule a listening session, find a nonprofit, like all of that. The story really helped to drive home the issue, why the issue mattered.
The only other thing I would add is, I've spent most of the time that I've chatted here talking about the Canopy work that I do. I do think for folks who are working on investigative projects, like there is also space for you to focus on solutions journalism. And just to give another sense of what this looks like is there are a lot of solutions that are proposed or being, that are getting funding, that are impacting various communities around the metro Atlanta area and beyond. And I think to a point you made earlier about like the evidence-based portion of this, like there is a driving question of like, does this solution actually work? And I think there's also a way to provide a healthy scrutiny around is this particular solution. It could be body cameras on police. It could be naloxone in communities. Like, is this working? And getting into not only a nuanced conversation around the problems and opportunities that exist around what is and isn't working. So there's a space for like investigative work to be done in solutions journalism too.
If I can add to that, I think it's also important when you're doing a solution story is to have a good understanding of who's defining the problem. And I think it goes back to what you were saying, Katrina, about getting to know the community and recognizing, this isn't the problem for us. The problem for us is actually looking like this. And that really helps us to redefine and kind of take things in a more culturally humble way.
Yes. I want to end with one of the nuggets from Michelle that I appreciated, and I want to open up to questions for folks who have some time. And this is a room full of journalists, so I know there will be some questions. But you said if we treat people as the problem, we're not going to find the solution. Mm-hmm. And I think whether that's in data and maps or in any other conversation that we're having as we go out in the field, that's a great way to continue to remember that there are deeper issues. It's difficult to cover, but there are also tools and resources and people who want to be alongside you in that.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we want to fix systems, not people.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, questions? Yes, Kelly.
I have two. So the first is can you talk a little bit about the funding landscape? Because when you're talking about solutions journalism, there's a lot more research, there's more time. It's not how does that change the way your resources are? What kind of resources are needed, and who is willing to
Invest in it.
indulge that, to get to the bottom of things. That's one. The other is, can you say something about data and the rise of artificial intelligence and how we are now all having to deal with the fact that is the data the right data? Is it correct data? And there's so many flies in the ointment. How can we protect the material, the data that we really need in order to get to the truth of the story?
Well, maybe I'll start with the funding landscape, and maybe I don't know if this will help, and maybe Max can add to this. Prior to COVID, I think there were a number of us funders who started to understand that investing in nonprofit journalism networks was important. It's not something that generally folks deeply understood, and so the existence of Canopy and other sources like that become more present for some of us who didn't even realize that that was something we could pay attention to and focus. And so we did have some conversations with funders and groups who were doing this work to introduce the funders to that. And so we were one of the initial investors along with others. I think more and more funders, as they think about what they want to invest in, you can invest into direct services, which people need food now. That is real, right? But if you really want to change the conditions, you also have to invest in narrative change work. You also have to invest in capacity building. So I think I would say that more and more funders are recognizing you have to do a little bit of all of that, and not one thing is the only thing or only solution.
Did you say invest in narrative
change work?
Change work.
Yeah. And that's how we would describe it in the philanthropic, pretty heady term, but it is the intention to really be able to also have other voices at the table, so that as it informs our work. And so there are a number of funders that's all they fund, but for us it was really adding to some contextual information around the communities we cared about. I don't know that.
I think kind of building off of that, this comes as probably no surprise to anyone in this room, but over the past 20 years, there's been a historic decline in the number of news outlets, the size of those outlets, and I think also in the midst of that, there's been a growing recognition that journalism is part of not only is part of the landscape of our democracy, but it's also the functioning part of a community and a city. And I think funders have, stepped in and helped nonprofit, either to help new nonprofits or existing nonprofits to continue to shore up some of the holes that remained in the landscape that was left by, in the city of Atlanta, a shrinking HAC or other outlets. But yeah, that's what I would say on that. Do you have anything to add?
I think the only thing that I would add is that, when we're seeking funding, we have to have some data to back it up. And I think you can find a lot of things through Solutions Journalism Network they've done research and outside parties looking at the impact of solutions journalism, is that generally we find that readers, viewers, listeners are going to spend more time with a solution story than they will a problem story. They're more likely to click on it in many circumstances. That also depends on headlines and other factors, but that folks are interested in. You can find data on that. And the other data that we already know, because I think at least every news director in the country reads the Reuters Oxford report that comes out every year. And every year we all cry a little when we see fewer people are looking at news. But why? Because they're finding it too depressing, right? They're finding it too sad. Solutions journalism isn't happy news, but it is a different way to approach the very serious and important issues that we're all facing, that maybe inspires a little bit of hope.
The other thing I would say, what drove us to also Canopy was this idea to also build capacity of residents to also tell their own stories. So they have a documentaries project that was important, but I'm telling you that was because it was guided by our data, right? We really used our child well-being index data to drive that. We wanted to know more about what was happening in these communities, and you can use the quantitative data, but there was some other data that we wanted to hear, and that lived experience mattered, and they had a solution that help to complement our work.
And in terms of trustworthy data and partners that do the sense making, that's a plug to be able to say you've got to have partners, somebody that you trust like a United Way, who can sense make with the data and also assure you that where you're pulling it from and the sourcing of that is trustworthy.
Yeah, and there's a huge process behind the scenes. So yes, we conceptually had this idea about a child wellbeing index, but Neighborhood Nexus, which is an organization that we helped to co-found, is the source of a lot of that data, the data sharing agreements they have with state agencies. They have a reputable team that's working on understanding that data, as well as other partners like Learn for Life, right, which is another organization that looks at education data in school districts across our metro region. So we did not do this by ourselves. So for us, I think there's an acknowledgement that AI is something to think about, but when we developed this data, it was with solid, trusted, and respected partners. And it took us time to make sure that we had the right data, that we're using it in the right ways. And so that sense making also is what has been helpful to us. And much of that sense making was, once we got the raw data, is bringing community leaders together to say, does this make sense? Like, do you see this? Is this represented? And so it's not a process of just putting data out there. It's also getting input from others before we release it to the public.
Any other thoughts on AI?
Where I see AI being used in journalism so far is to speed up work that is often, I guess, like simpler or like it could be for a stock, like how did the stock do today, or what was the score of the baseball game, kind of things that are distilling facts. I think where AI is going to do less work, at least in the short to medium term, from what we can see, is like to the point Jeremy made earlier about, like it can distill facts, but it can't necessarily like analyze or give you truth about something. And so I think in some ways journalism can be, or AI in journalism can help you get to the facts you need faster. It may also have negative implications from like a labor or workforce perspective, but I do think as you're doing like complex investigative or solutions-based journalism, or more broadly just like narrative storytelling, those things are going to be a lot harder for AI to fully do that work. So I think, but they can help enhance or make the people that are doing that kind of work better at their jobs.
How are we on time?
It's 10:04.
10:04. Any last question before we wrap? And then I know everybody here, I think, has a little bit of time to hang around, so you can always grab them directly. But any other burning questions, Fame? Yeah?
I had a question about how you find balance between digital and physical communications. Old Atlanta, so I missed the creative loafing. And when they went digital, you just go to it for events now. I don't think it's rare that someone would go online to look at a dope creative loafing article versus reading it physically now. But when you start talking generations, they'll say, well, the younger people want their communication via digital. And you can't do that all the way because you're leaving out another crowd that still likes to physically touch paper. So how do each of you in your external communications and journalism, how do you balance out the digital and the physical?
I think a real part of this conversation is meeting the community that you're writing for where they're at. And one of the things I really love about the work that Canopy's done is that in the process of listening and talking to communities, we are able to get a sense of how they consume their media. And that informs when we then report stories and bring them back to the communities that we're writing about, are we, if the place where everyone is communicating is on a Facebook group, we post the stories there. If they all read a hand-delivered newsletter by a resident, we want to partner with that publication and put the the material, the stories in there, if everyone's communicating by like a mass text chain, we want to make sure that, or on TikTok or whatever it might be for the variety of potential readers, we want to incorporate the design of the story and the storytelling into the media where people are going to be getting that article.
Zoe, did I see your hand up?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
I was just curious because you all talked a lot about like just spending time in your communities and getting to know people and their lived experience. And, I write for Decatur, and so I'm pretty connected to Decatur, but I still feel like that's something I could do a little bit better about. So I was just wondering kind of what advice you all would have for, how we could, just get better connected with the communities that we cover.
I think a lot of it is not just showing up to like, to take Decatur-ish for an example, like to a school board meeting or to the city commission meeting, or but showing up 30 minutes early and staying 30 minutes late, and making the part of your assignment not just going and covering the thing that's happening that day, but going and meeting the residents who are, you see at every meeting, whatever meeting you're covering, time in and time out, or the people that are commenting, that are, like I love chatting with someone who you might describe as like a gadfly, who is kind of raising hell about all the things, but also knows the community the best. You may not want to quote that person in every single story, but talking to people like that, I think, can not only help you deepen and broaden your understanding of a particular issue, but it can also give you a more informed historical background of how a particular problem got to the point where it's at. So I think of someone, like one of my favorite examples of this is, it could be like when I used to cover City Hall, there's a lovely senior advocate named Ben Howard who was at every meeting, would talk for his 2 minutes, and then was also, I would later learn, went to other meetings, and like by following him to certain issues, it helped me then come up with new story ideas I might not have thought of based on what the agenda for that meeting said, or based on what the vote was in that meeting. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, Michelle, this is a lot of your work, so I know you don't want to wait.
I could give you a lot of answers, but I think the simple thing that I would say is we need to be talking to and with and listening to community before we pick up our pencil, before we pick up our microphone. I talk to newsrooms about how to come up with a strategy specifically towards that. But for an individual reporter working with your team to see, okay, is there one day a month that I know I'm going to go to this food bank line and I'm just going to talk to people and I'm not going to make a story about it. I'm just going to get to know folks. It's something you can do in your own time about, like, I know I'm covering this community and I want to improve. So are there church events? Are there back to school events and things where you can just talk to folks before the story comes up? And one thing that I ask a lot of people, whether it's at a dinner party or at an event or even in every interview that I do, what stories are you not hearing? What is it that news is getting wrong about your community? And dollars to donuts, you're going to find a story there.
Well, one more thing I would add, and just to bring up a food bank example. Let's say there was the United Way was hosting or funding a food bank that was serving people in Decatur. I almost would want to go there not to write about United Way, but to kind of talk to everyone else and find a different story other than what the press release I got for that day was. And the reason for that is that there might be 4 other reporters writing, one for TV and one for print, about this event if they blasted it out to the media. I think the way you'll find a different and an original story is sometimes going to a place where something is happening, but not with the expectation that what you were invited there for is going to be your ultimate story.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you all. Thank you. Please stick around, ask any other questions you have. And thank you for doing the work that you're doing. I know Georgia Humanities is really passionate about this. Obviously, Atlanta Press Club is, in supporting local journalists. We're doing the good work already. And so I hope you'll help us think through, if there is another conversation, which we hope there is, what would that look like? What would be beneficial to you? What do you want to hear about? What do you want to discuss? And what does that room look like? So check in with us, keep doing the good work, and hopefully we will be in touch very soon. So thank everybody.